Some promises cost nothing to make and everything to keep. I've buried men who broke theirs, and I've knelt beside a girl who kept one when keeping it should have killed her. If you've ever been looked at like you were less than the dust on somebody's boots, if you've ever had a door shut on you before you even finished asking, then sit close to the fire, because this story is going to feel like it was written about you. It's about a girl nobody wanted, a ranch that couldn't afford her, and 11 words she said in a doorway that changed the shape of every life she touched. I was there for all of it. I'm still not sure I deserve to tell it, but somebody should. The wind came down off the Chiricahuas that October morning like it had somewhere better to be, and it carried the smell of coming snow, even though the sky was still that hard, cloudless blue that fools a man into leaving his coat behind. I remember I was fixing the corral gate. The bottom hinge had rusted through, and I'd been meaning to weld it for 3 weeks, which is another way of saying I'd been ignoring it for 3 weeks, and that morning it finally sagged so bad the whole gate dragged a furrow in the dirt every time you swung it. I had my back to the road. I heard the horse before I heard anything else, a slow, favoring walk, one hoof coming down lighter than the other 3. And I remember thinking, before I even turned around, that animal's hurting. Then I turned and I saw her. She sat a bay mare that had seen better decades, and the mare was lame in the near foreleg, and the girl herself couldn't have been more than 19, 20 at the outside. She had a man's canvas coat 2 sizes too big cinched around her with a length of rope, and her hat was crushed on one side like it had been sat on more than once, and her face, I'll get to her face. Her face is the part I still see. She stopped the mare at the edge of our property, and she just looked at the place. The main house with its peeling paint. The barn with the swayback roof I kept promising a leaner I'd fix before it came down on the milk cow. The scatter of outbuildings. She looked at all of it the way a starving man looks at a table set for somebody else. "Help you?" I called out. She didn't answer right off. She swung down instead, swung down careful, favoring her own left side the same way the mare favored its leg, and I filed that away, and she led the animal the last 30 feet by hand rather than make it carry her. That told me something too. "You the owner?" she asked. "Foreman, owner's inside, you lost." "No, sir." She stopped a respectful distance off. Up close her eyes were the gray of creek ice, and they didn't drop when they met mine, which surprised me because everything else about her said whipped dog. The coat, the rope belt, the way she held her ribs, but the eyes were steady. "I heard you were hearing." "You heard wrong." Something crossed her face then and was gone so fast I might have imagined it. Not quite disappointment, more like recognition. Like she'd been told no so many times it had stopped being news and started being weather. Just a thing that happened. Something you rode through. "I can work," she said anyway. "Cattle, horses, fence, whatever you got. I don't eat much. I don't need pay to start, just a roof, and I'll prove out and you can decide after." "We're not hearing," I said again, gentler this time, because there's a way of saying no to a person that at least lets them keep their spine, and I've never had much use for the other way. "It's not you. Ranch is barely making it. We let 2 men go in the spring. I got no work to give and no money to give for it." She nodded slow, took it in. I figured that was the end of it, and I already felt bad, the way you feel bad turning off a stray, and I was bracing to watch her lead that lame mare back down the road toward whatever came next for a girl like her, which was nothing good in that country in those years. And that's when a leaner came out onto the porch. Now I have to tell you about a leaner Fry, because you can't understand what happened next without her, and you can't understand her without understanding the year we'd had. Alina's husband, Tom, had owned the Circle F for 31 years. Built it out of nothing. Good man, hard man, the kind who'd give you the shirt off his back and then work you like a rented mule to make sure you appreciated it. Tom died the previous winter. Went out to check the stock in a storm the way he'd done 1,000 times, and his heart quit somewhere between the barn and the north pasture. and we found him the next morning half covered in snow with the lantern still clutched in his hand, burned out. Alina was 58 and she'd buried her husband, and she was trying to run a cattle operation with one foreman, a part-time boy from town, and a bank in Tucson that sent letters she'd stopped opening. She was proud. She was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, and she developed a hardness that year that wasn't natural to her. I'd known her 20 years and it wasn't, but grief will do that. It'll wall a person up brick by brick until you're talking to the wall instead of the woman. So when Alina came out on the porch and took one look at that girl and that busted mare, I braced for it. I figured she'd send the girl off harder than I had. Alina didn't have kindness to spare that year. She could barely afford her own. "Who's this?" Alina asked. "Girl looking for work. I told her we've got none." Alina came down the steps slow. She had Tom's old shotgun broke over her arm. She carried it everywhere that year, less for use than for company, I always thought. And she walked right up to the girl and looked her over head to foot the way you'd look over a horse you had no intention of buying. "You're hurt," Alina said. "No, ma'am." "You're holding your side and you came off that horse like your ribs are cracked. Don't lie to me on my own land, girl, it's rude." Alina's voice was flat. "Who did it?" The girl's jaw worked. For a second I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Man I worked for, last place. It's fine, ma'am, it's healing." "Why'd he do it?" "Because I told him I was leaving." Alina was quiet a moment. The wind moved between us all, and somewhere off in the pasture, a cow complained about nothing. "What's your name?" "Josephine, Josie." "Josie what?" "Just Josie, ma'am. Never had much use for the rest of it." Alina nodded like that made sense to her, which surprised me, and later I'd understand why. Alina had come up rough herself, before Tom, and there are things you recognize in a person only if you've worn them yourself. Josie was wearing something Alina knew. "I've got no money," Alina said. "You understand that. Whatever Roy told you is God's truth. This ranch is drowning. I've got maybe one more season before the bank takes it, and I'll be honest with you because you look like somebody's been dishonest with you plenty. Hearing you would be doing you no favor. This ship's going down. I won't put another soul on it. And here's where it happened. Here's the part I came to tell." Josie stood there in her too big coat with her cracked ribs and her lame horse and her whole life apparently fitting in the saddlebags behind her. And she looked at that failing ranch and that grieving woman. And instead of arguing about wages or begging or making promises about how hard she'd work, instead of any of the things a desperate person usually says, she said something else. "Then let me go down with it," Josie said. "You don't have to pay me. You don't have to keep me past when it's gone, but nobody should have to watch their whole life sink alone. I'll bail till my arms fall off. And if it goes under anyway," she paused, and her voice didn't break, but it got very quiet, "then at least you won't have gone under by yourself. That's my promise. I'll stay to the end, whatever the end is. I have been on this earth 62 years. I have heard a lot of people say a lot of things. I have never, before or since, heard anything land the way that landed." Alina Fry, hard, walled-up, grieving Alina, who hadn't cried at her own husband's funeral because she was too busy holding everyone else up. Alina made a sound I'd never heard her make. Just once. A short, cracked thing, half swallowed. And she turned her face away toward the mountains so neither of us would see it, and when she spoke again her voice was rough as a rasp. "Roy," she said, not looking at me, "put her horse in the barn, the near stall, out of the wind, and go easy on that leg. A breath. Girl can stay." That was the promise. 11 words at the heart of it. I'll stay to the end, whatever the end is, and I want you to hold on to them, because the story of that winter is the story of what those words cost, and what they were worth, and the two turned out to be very different numbers. Josie earned her keep from the first hour, and never stopped. "I've worked with a lot of hands. Good ones, lazy ones, drunks and dreamers, and one fellow who could rope anything that moved but couldn't be trusted near a whiskey bottle or another man's wife. Josie wasn't the most skilled I ever saw, but she was the willingest, and after enough years you learn that willing beats skilled about 4 times out of 5, because skill sits down when it's tired and willing keeps standing. She was up before me and I'm up before God. She'd have the stock fed and the stalls half-mucked by the time I got my boots on, and when I told her to slow down that she'd burn herself out inside a month at that pace, she just said, "Got a lot of ground to make up, Roy," and kept going. Never did figure out what ground she thought she was making up. Ground with who? Herself, maybe. Her ribs healed. She never spoke of the man who'd cracked them, and I never asked, though there were nights by the fire I wanted to, and one night I got close and she looked at me across the flames and said, "Some things you set down and don't pick back up. That's one of mine." So I let it lie. A person's got a right to their own silences. But I'll tell you what I noticed, watching her that first month. She flinched at raised hands. Not raised voices, she could take a chewing out without a blink, and Lord knows I gave her a few learning the ropes, but a raised hand, even reaching for a shelf above her, and she'd go still for half a heartbeat like a rabbit that's heard a hawk. She thought nobody saw. I saw. I made a point after that of always telling her before I reached past her for anything. Never explained why. She never asked. But she stopped flinching around me by and by, and I counted that a small thing I'd done right in a life with plenty of things I'd done wrong. And she loved that ranch. That's the thing I can't explain and won't try to. It wasn't hers. It was going under. Any sane person would have held it at arm's length, done the work and kept their heart in their pocket where it was safe. Josie did the opposite. She loved the place like it was already home, like the bank letters didn't exist, like loving something hard enough might be a form of saving it. Maybe she'd never had a thing to love before. Maybe when you've gone your whole life owning nothing, you'll pour everything you've got into the first thing that lets you stand near it, even knowing, especially knowing, you're going to lose it. I think about that more than I should at my age. Now here is where I have to tell you the ranch was in worse trouble than even a leaner let on. The cattle market had cratered. Beef prices had fallen through the floor 2 years running and shown no sign of getting up. The Circle F ran mostly cattle like everybody, and everybody was herding. But a leaner was herding worse because Tom had taken a loan 2 years before he died to buy the south section, good land, the best on the place, river bottom grass, and the note on it was murdering her. The bank in Tucson held that note. And the man who held the bank, more or less, was a fellow named Colonel Ambrose DeWitt. DeWitt wasn't a real colonel. He'd given himself the title the way small men give themselves large things. He'd come into the territory 10 years back with money nobody could quite trace, and he'd spent that decade buying up ranches the honest way, which is to say, he'd wait for a hard year, and drought and low prices made plenty of hard years. And when a family got behind on a note he held, he'd take the land and leave the family with the road. He owned a third of the valley that way. He wanted the rest. He wanted the Circle F South section particular, because that river bottom was the only reliable water for miles, and a man who controlled the water controlled everything that drank. Alina knew he was circling. She'd known since Tom died. DeWitt had come to the funeral, if you can feature that, and stood at the graveside with his hat over his heart. And after they'd filled Tom in, he'd taken Alina's hand and said how sorry he was and how, if ever the burden got too heavy, he'd be honored to take the south section off her hands at a fair price so she could rest easy. Fair price at a funeral over the fresh dirt. Alina told me later she'd smiled at him and thanked him kindly and gone inside and been sick into the wash basin. She never forgot it. Neither did I. It's the kind of thing that tells you the whole shape of a man in a single stroke. DeWitt gave us till the spring. The note came due in April. If Alina couldn't pay, and she couldn't, there was no way on this earth she could, DeWitt took the south section. And without the south section, the rest of the Circle F was a dry husk not worth the taxes on it. And Alina would sign the whole thing over for pennies, and DeWitt would have his water and his valley and one more family on the road. That was the winter Josie rode into. That was the end she'd promised to stay for. She just didn't know the shape of it yet. None of us did quite. The first snow came the second week of November, and it came hard. And it's a snowstorm that gave me the first real measure of what Josie was made of, past willing. We had cattle in the north pasture that should have been brought down to the lower range before the weather turned, and we hadn't, because there were 3 of us doing the work of 8 and something's always left undone. The storm came in overnight, faster than the sky had promised, and by dawn there was a foot down and more falling sideways and 40 head of cattle stranded up north with drifts building between them and shelter. You lose cattle in weather like that. They drift with the wind, pile up against fences, smother or freeze. 40 head we couldn't afford to lose. 40 head might have been the difference between limping to spring and not. I told Alina we'd lose some and there was no help for it. No man could work in that, and I meant it, and I believed it. Josie was already saddling the bay. "You'll die out there," I told her. "That's not brave, that's stupid, and I won't have your death on this place." "Then come with me," she said, cinching the girth, "and we'll be stupid together and maybe neither of us dies." God help me, I went. I've thought about why 100 times. I was 50 years older than sense. But there's a thing that happens when someone young and half your size looks at an impossible job and just starts doing it without drama, without asking you to admire them for it. It shames you, not in a bad way, in the way that reminds you who you used to be before the years wore you down to practical. I'd have let those cattle die. Josie wouldn't. And standing in that barn, I found I couldn't stand to be the kind of man who let them die, while a girl rode out to save them. So we rode out. I won't stretch the story of that day longer than it needs. It was 9 hours of the worst work I've ever done. We couldn't see 50 feet. The cold got into your bones and set up house there. We found the cattle in bunches, drifted against the north fence line just like I'd feared, some already down. And we hauled the down ones up and got them moving and drove them south into the wind by main force and cussing. And twice I lost Josie in the white, and twice I found her again by following the sound of her voice. She talked to the cattle the whole time, low and steady, the way you talk to a spooked child, and it was that sound that kept me oriented when I couldn't see my own horse's ears. We lost 4 head, 4 out of 40. Any other outfit in that country lost their whole north herd that week. We lost 4 because a girl with cracked ribs barely healed decided that some was not the same as none, and dragged a broke-down old foreman out into a blizzard to prove it. The last mile home Josie's mare went down in a drift, just quit, spent, and Josie got off and walked and led it in that wind half frozen. And when I told her to leave the horse and ride double, she said, "She carried me here. I'll not leave her in a drift." And she walked the last mile leading a horse that had nothing left, because that was who she was, all the way down to the bottom of her. And I have never in my life been prouder to be cold and half dead alongside anybody. Alina met us at the barn with lanterns and hot coffee laced with something stronger, and a look on her face I hadn't seen since before Tom died. Not happiness. It was too tired for happiness. But something had woken up in her. Some ember she'd buried under all that grief. She looked at the 36 head we'd brought in. She looked at Josie, blue-lipped and swaying on her feet and still fussing over her mare before she'd see to herself. "Get in the house," Alina said, "both of you now." And then quieter to Josie's back, "Thank you." Josie stopped, turned. And she gave Alina a look I'll carry to my grave, surprised, almost frightened, like the words had struck something unguarded. "For what?" Josie said. "For not letting me lose more than I had to," Alina said. "For a while now I've been letting things go because losing felt easier than fighting. You didn't let me. Get in the house." I think that was the night it stopped being a job for Alina. I think that was the night that girl stopped being a hand who'd wandered in and started being, I don't have the word, not a daughter exactly, but the shape of one, the place where one might go. December was bad. I won't pretend otherwise. The cold settled in and didn't leave, and the work got harder, and the money got tighter, and the letters from the bank got shorter and colder than the weather. Alina stopped even pretending she wouldn't open them. She'd read them at the kitchen table by lamplight with her jaw set, and then fold them careful and put them in a drawer that was getting full, and she'd sit a while with her coffee going cold, and Josie learned to just sit with her at those times. Not talking. Just being another warm body in the room, so Alina wasn't alone with it. DeWitt came to visit twice that month. The first time he came friendly, all oil and concern. The colonel in his fine coat with his fine horse, and a man riding behind him who didn't say anything and whose only job, near as I could tell, was to look like the kind of trouble DeWitt could bring if friendly didn't work. He sat in Alina's parlor and drank Alina's coffee and talked about the terrible times, just terrible, and how a woman alone shouldn't have to carry such a weight, and how his offer still stood, more generous even. He could go as high as, and he named a number that was an insult dressed up as a mercy. Alina thanked him for his concern and told him she'd manage. DeWitt smiled and said he certainly hoped so, he surely did, and it would grieve him to see the note called in April. But of course a bank was a bank and had its obligations, and a man in his position, why, his hands were often tied. He looked at Josie on his way out. She was in the yard splitting wood and she'd stopped to watch him mount, and he took her in the too big coat, the calluses, the whole story of her written plain, and he smiled and touched his hat and said, "New hand, Mrs. Fry. Times must be better than you let on if you can afford help." "She works for room and board," Alina said. "There's more than one kind of rich, Colonel." DeWitt laughed like that was a fine joke and rode off, and Josie watched him go the whole way down the road, and when he was gone she said, quiet, "I've known men like that. He'll come back meaner when the sweet doesn't work." She was right. She was almost always right about men like that. It's a knowledge you pay a terrible price to get, and she'd paid it. The second time DeWitt came, near Christmas, he wasn't friendly. He came alone this time, oddly, and he didn't get off his horse, and he told Alina across the yard that he'd heard she was thinking of trying to make the April payment, and that he'd advise against overextending herself, and that accidents happen on a ranch short-handed as hers. Fences came down, cattle strayed, fires started. A body couldn't be too careful, and he'd truly hate, to see anything befall the Circle F before spring settled things proper. Then he rode off before Alina could answer, which was its own kind of answer. We all understood it. It was a threat, plain as a slap. And the worst of it was it worked, in a way, because that night at the supper table nobody ate much, and Alina finally said the thing out loud that she'd been carrying alone. "I can't make the payment," she said. "You both should know it since you've thrown in with this place. I've done the figures 40 times. Even if we sell every head come spring, even if the price recovers, which it won't, I'm $1,100 short of the note. There's no path to it. I've known since October. I let you both work like dogs, and I've known the whole time it wouldn't be enough." The kitchen was quiet, the fire popped. "So why'd you let us?" I asked, not angry, just needing to know. Alina looked old in the lamplight. "Because when Josie stood in that yard and said she'd go down with the ship, I found I didn't want to go down without fighting, even a losing fight. Tom would have fought, I owed him a fight." She pressed her lips together. "But it's a losing one. I won't lie to you about that. Come April, DeWitt takes the south section and the rest isn't worth keeping, and I'll sign it over, and that'll be the end of 31 years. I'm sorry to you both." And that's when Josie set down her fork and said the thing that turned the whole story sideways. "How much did you say? The exact number?" $1,140, Alina said. "Might as well be $1,000,000. Josie was quiet a long moment. She had a way of going somewhere behind her eyes when she was deciding something, and I watched her go there and come back, and when she came back her face had changed. Settled. Like a woman who's found the bottom of a deep water and put her feet down on it at last. "I might know where to get it," Josie said. Alina stared at her. "Girl, you don't have $1,100. You don't have 11. "No," Josie agreed, "but I know where there's more than that, and it's mine. or it was owed to me, which is close enough. She stood up from the table. Her hands weren't quite steady, and she pressed them flat against her thighs to still them, and I understood then that whatever she was about to say cost her more than the blizzard had. I need to tell you both something, and after I tell it you might want me gone, and I'll understand if you do. But I promised I'd stay to the end, and I aim to keep it, and this is the only way I know to give this place an end worth staying for. She looked at Alina, she looked at me. My name isn't just Josie, she said. And the man who cracked my ribs, he wasn't the first thing I ran from. He was the last. The fire popped again. Outside, the wind pushed at the shutters like something trying to get in. And that's where I have to stop the first part of it, because what Josie told us at that table is the whole heart of the second half, and it deserves to be told whole, with room to breathe. I'll say only this to carry you over. Everything I'd figured about that girl was true and also nowhere near the truth. I'd read her as a stray, a whipped dog drifter, a hard-luck case who'd blown in on the wind. And she was those things. But she was carrying something else under the too-big coat and the rope belt and the calluses. She was carrying a name, and a wrong, and a secret that could either save the Circle F or bury it deeper than DeWitt ever could. She'd promised to stay to the end. She was about to find out, we all were, that the end she'd promised to stay for wasn't the end that was coming. The lamp was burning low and Alina didn't get up to trim it, and so Josie told the whole thing in a light that kept getting smaller, which felt right somehow. Some stories you tell better in the dark. My father's name was Gideon Vance, she said. I didn't know the name. Alina did. I saw it hit her, a small tightening around the eyes, but she didn't say anything, and Josie went on. He ran cattle up in the Sulphur Springs Valley when I was small. Good spread. Not big, but good. My mother died when I was 6, and after that it was just him and me, and he raised me on a horse because he didn't know what else to do with a girl, and I didn't give him much choice about it. I could rope before I could spell. He used to say I was the best hand he had and the only one he didn't pay, and he'd laugh, and I thought that was the funniest thing in the world. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't, still pressed flat to her thighs. When I was 14, DeWitt came for us. The wind leaned on the shutters. Same as here, same exact play. A bad year, a note my father taken to buy breeding stock, and DeWitt behind the bank that held it. Only my father wouldn't sell. He was a stubborn man, I come by it honest, and he told DeWitt to his face he'd see him in hell before he'd hand over land his own hands had cleared. And DeWitt smiled and tipped his hat and said accidents happened on a short-handed ranch. She looked up. You've heard him say it, word for word. He said it to every family he's taken. It's practically a prayer with him. Josie, Alina said, very quiet. What happened to your father? There was a fire, Josie said. In the spring, 3 weeks before the note came due. It started in the barn at night with my father inside seeing to a mare that was foaling, and the barn door was jammed from the outside. I know it was jammed from the outside because I'm the one who tried to open it and I couldn't. And I could hear him in there. She stopped. She breathed. I have watched men take bullets with less in their face than Josie had in hers saying that. I was 14. She said again, like the number was the important part, like she needed us to understand how small 14 is. I couldn't get the door. A neighbor's boy who'd been sweet on me, he'd ridden over that night and he pulled me back when the roof went, or I'd have gone in after my father and burned with him. I fought that boy. I've never told him I'm sorry for the things I said, fighting him. He saved my life and I cursed him for it. Nobody said anything. There wasn't anything to say. The fire in Alina's stove had burned down to coals, and none of us moved to feed it. They called it an accident, Josie said. A lantern kicked over, they said. My father was careful as any man alive around fire. A rancher who's careless with fire doesn't stay a rancher long. But they called it an accident because DeWitt owned the man who'd have called it anything else. And with my father dead, the note came due and there was no one to pay it, and I was 14 and a girl. So DeWitt took the spread for the debt, and he was kind about it in front of people, so kind. He even offered to see me placed with a family in town. Everyone said what a Christian thing. Colonel DeWitt, taking in the orphan he'd made. She laughed, and it was the worst sound I heard that whole winter, worse than the wind, worse than the cattle dying. I ran instead, she said. That same week. I'd rather have died on the road than eat one meal he paid for. And I did nearly die a few times over the next 5 years. You don't want to know the ways a girl alone comes near dying out here. But I lived and I worked, place to place, hand to mouth, and I never told a soul who I was, because DeWitt's a powerful man and I was nobody, and nobody would have believed the nobody. The last place, the man who cracked my ribs, I'd stayed too long and he decided he owned me the way DeWitt owns things. And when I said I was leaving, he tried to make me stay the only way men like that know how. So I left with the ribs and the mare and rode till I found a road I hadn't ridden, and that road brought me here. She looked at Alina, and this is the part I'll never get over, not if I live to 100. I didn't know it was DeWitt, Josie said. When I rode up, I swear before God I didn't know he was the one squeezing you. If I'd known I might have ridden on because I'm a coward about him. I've spent 5 years being a coward about him. But then I saw the letters on your table when you weren't looking, and I saw the name on the bank, and I saw him ride into this yard and say that same prayer about accidents, and I knew. And I understood why that road brought me here and not somewhere else. Josie, Alina started. There's money, Josie said over her. She had to get it out. That's what I'm trying to tell you, and doing it poorly. When my father died, there was a strong box. He kept it buried, a lot of ranchers did. They didn't trust banks, and God knows they were right not to. And DeWitt never found it because I'm the only one who knew where. My father showed me when I was 10. Said a Vance always keeps something the world can't take. There's near $2,000 in gold in that box. It's been in the ground 11 years, 4 days' ride north of here, on land DeWitt thinks he owns entire. It's mine. It's the last thing my father left me, and I've never touched it because touching it meant going back, going near him, and I couldn't. For 5 years I couldn't. She stood up straight, the lamp guttered. But $1,140, she said, would make the payment. And there's near 2,000 in that box. And I made a promise to stay to the end. So I'll go get it. I'll ride north and I'll dig up my father's box and I'll bring back the money and we'll pay DeWitt's note with Vance gold. And he'll never know, that the girl he made an orphan bought back the ranch he was trying to steal. And that, her voice finally broke just at the end, just on the last of it, that would be an end worth staying for. That would be my father getting to reach out of the ground and stop him, one time, one single time in this one place. Let me do that, please. Let me keep my promise. The room was silent a long, long moment. Then Alina Fry got up from her chair, and she crossed to that girl, and she took Josie's face in both her weathered hands the way a mother does. The way I don't think anybody had done to Josie since she was 6 years old, and she said, "No." Josie's face fell. "No, you will not ride 4 days north alone in the dead of winter into the country of the man who murdered your father," Alina said, and her voice was shaking, but it was iron underneath the shaking. "You will not do that alone, because I have lost a husband and I have watched this ranch dying, and I will be damned. I will be damned, Josie, before I let the one good thing that's walked onto this place in a year ride off alone to face her nightmare so that I can keep my dirt. Do you hear me?" "Alina." "We'll go together," Alina said. "All 3 of us. Roy can hold the place." "Roy cannot hold the place," I said. "And Roy is not letting the both of you ride north without him, so you can quit dividing us up right now. The boy from town can watch the stock 4 days. I've faced DeWitt's kind before, and I'd sooner do it with you than sit here wondering." I hadn't planned to say it. It came out on its own. But once it was out, I knew it was true, truer than most things I've said in my life. Josie looked between us, and the look on her face, I've circled around trying to describe that girl's face this whole story, and I'll fail one last time. It was the look of a person who has been alone so long and so completely that being not alone doesn't compute, doesn't fit through the door, has to be turned sideways to even get inside her. She'd offered to go down with a stranger's ship because nobody should sink alone. She understood that about other people, bone deep, and it had never once occurred to her that anybody might refuse to let her sink alone. She sat back down at the table because I think her legs quit, and she put her face in her hands, and Alina held her while she came apart. 11 years of it all at once, and I went out to the barn and busied myself with nothing so they could have that without me watching. And I'll tell you the truth. I did some coming apart of my own out there in the cold with the horses for witnesses. Old men cry too. We just do it in barns. We rode north the second day after Christmas. I'll not draw out the journey. 4 days up, hard cold, but the weather held better than we'd any right to expect. And Josie said once, quiet riding, that she thought her father was keeping the sky off us. And none of us laughed, because up there in that white country it didn't seem impossible. She led us true. 11 years, and she rode straight to it like the years hadn't happened, up through the Sulphur Springs country, past a ranch house I understood without being told had been hers once, DeWitt's now, smoke coming from a chimney that used to be her father's. We gave it a wide berth in the dark. Josie looked at it the whole time we skirted it, the way she'd looked at DeWitt riding away, memorizing something, and I moved my horse up close beside hers, not saying anything, just being there, and after a while she moved on. The box was where she'd said. A half-day's ride past the house, up a dry wash, under a particular flat rock at the foot of a particular dead cottonwood that her father had picked because, she said, a dead tree doesn't change and a live one does. We dug in frozen ground for 2 hours with the wind trying to kill us and Alina holding the horses and calling out that she thought she heard riders twice, which turned out to be nothing but had all our hearts in our throats. And then my shovel struck iron. Josie went down on her knees in the frozen dirt and dug the last of it out with her hands. Bare hands in that cold, and I didn't stop her, because I understood it was hers to do. She lifted out a strongbox black with age and cold, and she held it against her chest a moment with her eyes shut, and her lips moved, and I don't know what she said to her father, and I never asked. Then she opened it, and the gold was there. The gold was there, all of it. 11 years in the ground, and DeWitt none the wiser. And on top of the gold was a letter, oilcloth wrapped. And Josie unwrapped it with shaking hands and read it by lantern light. And whatever her father had written to whoever might someday find it. She read it 3 times and folded it and put it inside her coat against her heart, and never showed it to a living soul. And that was hers too. And I've always been glad. She had one thing out of all this that was only hers. All right, she said. Her voice was different now, steadier than I'd ever heard it. Let's go home. Let's go pay that man. Home, she said, home. 4 days' ride from the Circle F, standing over her murdered father's grave, gold in the country that had broken her. She called that failing ranch home. I don't think she noticed she'd done it. I noticed. Alina noticed. Neither of us said anything, but Alina's eyes met mine over the lantern, and we didn't need to. Now I could tell you the ride home was hard, and it was, but you don't need the miles. You need April. We made the payment in cash. Josie insisted on being there when we did it, in the bank in Tucson, and Alina tried to talk her out of it, thought it too dangerous. DeWitt might recognize her, but Josie said no. She'd hidden from that man for 11 years, and she was done hiding, and she wanted to watch the note marked paid with her own eyes. DeWitt was there. Of course he was there. April, the Circle F note due, his prize about to fall into his hand, he wouldn't have missed it. He was sitting in the banker's office looking like a cat at a mouse hole, and when Alina walked in and said $1,140 in gold on the desk, the look on his face was worth every frozen mile. Paid in full, Alina said. You can put your prayer about accidents back in your pocket, Colonel. This ship's not sinking. DeWitt recovered fast, men like him always do, and he smiled and said what a pleasant surprise. He was delighted truly. He'd only ever wanted what was best for a widow alone, and where on earth had she come by such a sum in times like these? And that's when Josie stepped up beside Alina and pushed her hat back so the light fell on her face full, and she looked Colonel Ambrose DeWitt in the eye for the first time in 11 years. "Gideon Vance's gold," she said. I watched a man turn to stone. I watched the blood go out of his face like water out of a pulled plug. I watched him look at that girl and see, finally, 11 years late, the child he'd made an orphan grown standing in front of him, alive, holding the one thing he thought he'd erased from the earth. "You don't know me," Josie said, quiet, and the whole room had gone still, the banker frozen with his pen up. "You've forgotten me. You've forgotten all of them, I expect, everyone you ever put on the road, everyone you buried to get their dirt, but I remember you. I was 14, and I remember every word you said the day you took my father's land off my father's coffin. And I want you to know something, Colonel." She leaned in just slightly. "You didn't get everything. You never do. There's always something a family keeps that the world can't take. My father told me that when I was 10 years old and you just watched it come true. His gold paid this woman's note. His gold stopped you today in this room. And he's been 11 years in the ground to do it." DeWitt didn't say a word. There wasn't a word for him to say. Whatever threat he might have made, whatever oil he might have poured, Josie had taken it all away from him just by being alive and knowing what she knew, in a room full of witnesses, with the note marked paid. He stood up. He put on his hat. "And I'll give the devil this much." At the door he stopped and he turned and he looked at Josie one more time, and something moved in his face that might, in a better man, have been shame. Might have been. I'll never know. He went out and he didn't slam the door, and that was the last any of us ever saw of Colonel Ambrose DeWitt up close. He didn't stop, understand. Men like that don't stop, not really. He went on being what he was, but something went out of him in that valley after that spring. Folks noticed it, and he took no more ranches that anyone recall, and 2 years on he sold up and went east and died there, of nothing dramatic, of just being old and hollow, and the families he'd put on the road did not mourn him. The Circle F did not fall. Beef prices came up a little the next year, enough. Josie's father's gold had bought us the season we needed, and one good season leads to the next if you work it, and we worked it. There was gold left over from the box. Josie tried to give it all to Alina, and Alina wouldn't take $1 past the note. And they fought about it. Actually fought. 2 stubborn women hollering in a kitchen, which is a thing that only happens between people who have decided to keep each other. And in the end, Josie put the rest in the bank in her own name. The first thing she'd ever owned that couldn't be cracked out of her ribs or burned out of a barn. She stayed. Of course she stayed. She'd promised to stay to the end, and the end never came. That's the ironic twist of it, the thing I still turn over. She rode an offering to help a stranger sink, and instead the two of them floated, and the promise she'd meant as a way to die decent turned into a reason to live. Alina left her the Circle F years on. When Alina passed, left it to Josie outright. Papers all drawn up proper, because by then Josie was the nearest thing to a daughter Alina had on this earth, and everyone including the law understood it. Josie runs it still. Ran it, last I knew. I'm too old to work now, and I sit on the porch she rebuilt, and I watch her move around that place she loves like loving it hard enough might save it, and I think it did in the end. I think that's exactly what happened. I think she loved it so hard it couldn't sink. I want to end on the porch, because that's where I mostly am now, and because of something that happened there last spring that I can't get out of my mind. A girl came up the road. Young, sat a horse that had seen better days. Man's coat too big for her, cinched with rope. You know the shape of her. I've been the shape of her myself once, longer ago than I'll admit. I saw Josie come out onto the porch, gray in her hair now, lines around those creek-ice eyes, and I saw her look at that girl, and I saw her go still the way she used to go still, and I knew what she was seeing. She was seeing herself, 16 years back, in a doorway being weighed. The girl asked for work, said she didn't need pay to start, said she'd prove out. And Josie came down the steps, and she looked that girl over head to foot the way Alina once looked at her, and she said something I couldn't hear from the porch. But I saw the girl's face when she said it. I saw the girl's whole face change, that same crack, that same being weighed and found worth something look, and I saw her get down off her horse careful, favoring one side, and lead it the last 30 feet by hand so it wouldn't have to carry her. Josie put her up in the barn, near stall out of the wind. I never did ask what Josie said to her in the yard. I didn't need to. I've got a fair idea it was some version of 11 words she once said herself, in a doorway, to a woman who was ready to turn her away. Some version of nobody should have to face the end alone. That's the thing about a promise like that. Once somebody keeps one for you, you spend the rest of your life keeping it for somebody else.